And I will just open up with a couple notes of business to get us started here. Very in brief, make sure that you are on mute, which you should be when you come in the room. Open your chat, say hi to folks, use the chat to put questions and comments in. We will keep an eye on the chat and respond from there in conversation with you. So we hope that you will use that. There will be time for some Q&A and some dialoguing at the end of our conversation. So we will, pardon me, as I'm trying to bring up my bios here, we will engage with you in that way at the end. So get your questions and comments ready at that point, and people will continue to join us as we go. But before we dive into our conversation today on faith and philanthropy, I'm going to pass it to Ben Parsons, who is a student here at CTS and is going to lead us in our words of gathering to bring us together. So Ben, I pass it to you.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Parsons. My pronouns are he, him. I live in Central Massachusetts, and I'm in my fourth part-time year of the MDiv program pursuing chaplaincy. I identify as a secular humanist, meaning that I believe in the inherent dignity and goodness of every human being, and the collective pursuit of justice and human flourishing, and all from a secular perspective. I also believe in our intrinsic interconnectedness with each other and the mutual responsibility we all have for one another. So today, I want to offer this reading for our gathering. It's titled "For Citizenship," and it comes from the Irish poet and philosopher John O'Donoghue. In these times when anger is turned into anxiety and someone has stolen the horizons and mountains, our small emperors on parade never expect our indifference to disturb their nakedness. They keep their heads down and their eyes gleam with reflection from aluminum economic ground. The media wraps everything in a cellophane of sound, and the ghost surface of the virtual overlays the breathing earth. The industry of distraction makes us forget that we live in a universe. We have become converts to the religion of stress and its deity of progress, that we may have courage to turn aside from it all and come to kneel down before the poor to discover what we must do, how to turn anxiety back into anger, how to find our way home. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Ben, and sharing a bit about yourself. We appreciate you being here and opening us up. I have the great honor right now on our conversation about the intersection of philanthropy and faith to introduce our first guest, Dilnaz Waraich, who is a CTS alumni and president of the WF Fund, a national leader in uplifting marginalized communities in education, human services, and religious pluralism. She is a philanthropic advocate, that was a tough word for me to get, community organizer, educator, and interfaith activist with more than 3 decades of experience in relationship building, cultural sensitivity facilitation, spiritual engagement activities, and civic empowerment. And we are thrilled to partner with Dilnaz on this and many other activities together. And we're so grateful for your presence here, Dilnaz. Zoya Raynes is also joining us. Zoya is a philanthropist as well for the Jewish Funders Network Board of Trustees and a managing director on the Senior Relationship Management Team at Bank of America, a group of professionals who are responsible for developing and strengthening relationships between Bank of America and key institutional investor clients. Outside of the office, Ms. Raynes is very active in the nonprofit and philanthropic community, a hard word for me today, and a board member of the Jewish Funders Network, Jewish Heritage Program, and Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, among others. And we are very glad to engage in this conversation with you. Joining both of them will be our beloved president, Dr. Brad Braxton, who is without an introduction, and I will let you speak and introduce yourself as our Chief Listening Officer and President of the seminary. So welcome to everybody, and Dr. Braxton, President Braxton, I pass it to you.
Kim, thank you so much for those gracious words. Greetings to one and all. I want to begin by offering my personal words of thanks to Ben for your beautiful reflections and for reminding us of the danger of worshiping in the altars of the religion of stress. So thank you for those very gracious and thoughtful words to begin our conversation. And I also appreciate, Ben, you identifying your connection to secular humanism. Very fitting, because today I am zooming in from the campus of Rice University and am very grateful to be sitting in the office right now of Dr. Anthony Penn, one of the most distinguished scholars of our time and one of the most erudite secular humanists. Dr. Penn and I are giving a book talk on our book on the dialogue between Christianity and secular humanism this evening at Rothko Chapel here in Houston. So I'm delighted to be able to zoom in and bring greetings from the community here at Rice University and the broader community of Houston. I'm delighted to also have this opportunity to be in conversation with my colleagues in philanthropy, Dilnaz and Zoya, and so eager to hear your reflections. And as we were thinking about how to launch this conversation, we decided that there's no better way to launch a conversation like this than to tell some stories. So we're going to, in our own way, talk about our initial understanding of philanthropy from our situatedness in our own religious, spiritual, and ethical traditions, and then engage one another in dialogue with the hopes of then having a broader dialogue with the community. As I think about philanthropy from the perspective of the Christianity that has formed me, and now many other religious traditions and spiritual and ethical traditions that are enriching me, but my native tradition is that of a kind of warm and generous evangelical piety of Christianity. And it has been said that everything we need to know about the world, we often learn in kindergarten. So you will allow me to start my conversation about philanthropy when I am 5 and 6 years old at the First Baptist Church, 226 South Broad Street in Salem, Virginia, where my dad was the pastor for more than 30 years, and my mom was a very, very engaged and influential lay leader and the musician of the Little People's Choir. We called the Little People's Choir the Tots Choir. And then when you got old enough, you finally graduated to the real youth choir. But I want to go back to that moment when I am 5 years old and in kindergarten at First Baptist Church, and I'm on the Tots Choir. And my mother taught us a song that to this day enriches my understanding of philanthropy. I can hear her playing it now, and it has been more than 4, almost now 5 decades. The song simply said, are you ready? Running over, my cup is full and running over. Since the Lord saved me, I am happy as can be. My cup is full and running over. And the fun part when you're 5 years old is not just singing running over, but it's actually twirling your hands, because our hands were designed to replicate the overflow that our cups, the things that we hold our blessings in from God, are so full that they just run over. As I think about philanthropy today, I come to philanthropy from the perspective of the Christianity that has formed me, even though I do take many issues with many of the thoughts around Orthodox Christianity now, and I'm deeply connected to other traditions like secular humanism and African-derived traditions. I still remember the importance of being told that I engage the world. I am here to make the world better, to partner with the world, not from a place of deficit, but from a place of profound abundance. running over, running over. My cup is full and running over. So that I engage the world. I am able to give to the world. I am able to receive from the world, not out of a place of stinginess, but out of a place of profound moral, spiritual, emotional, and yes, financial abundance that allows me to recognize that I am most like God when I give, running over. My cup is full and running over. Dilnaz, I'm curious, what thoughts, stories, images do you have as you think about philanthropy from your situated?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for grounding us, Ben and Kim, in this conversation and setting us to the direction of really making sure we're intentional with our thoughts. And then I also just really want to say thank you, Dr. Braxton and Zoya, for being courageous and being in this space, because I think, we're at a time where really America's so polarized and we're not having conversations with, our interfaith partners. So I'm just so happy to have this conversation and continue having conversations such as this. So, I also think about the word philanthropy. I'm very uncomfortable with it. So faith and philanthropy, right? Like our faith drives us to do this work. Our faith drives us to do this running over and being generous. But it's that word philanthropy, because growing up, especially in Chicago, I know Zoya is going to mention this as well. Zoya and I are both immigrants, right? Like that immigrant story is so part of our DNA and how we do everything. So when we came to Chicago, when I was 2 years old, I would hear a lot about like philanthropy and philanthropist, and it never sat well with me. It was never a good story about philanthropy. It was always like some wealthy individual or some affluent white man or some elderly man doing something that ultimately caused harm to our city. It didn't cause any type of goodness in our city in the long run. And that's what sat with me for like so many years. And about 5 years ago, when someone said, Dilnaz, why don't you just call yourself a philanthropist? I was like, is that person insulting me? I'm not sure. Why is that person calling me that? So that's why, Kim, I know you had a hard time saying philanthropic advocate. I really want to change it. I don't want to be a philanthropist. I want to be a philanthropic advocate. I want to make sure we definitely do the running over and the generosity, all of that, because our faith wants us to do that. But it's not just about an allocation, but it's being in partner, walking alongside, listening, crying together, and doing all of that because we're philanthropic advocates. And so I'm reclaiming that word and how I feel comfortable with it. So I also think about, as a Muslim, philanthropy, exactly what you said, Dr. Braxton, starts at home. As a Muslim, it's the simple forms of uplifting your Muslim brothers and sisters, as well as Muslim brothers and sisters that are not in your faith as well. The term zakat is really important. I think about how zakat is a form of almsgiving, and it's one of the pillars of Islam. It's the root of allowing the And I think about the word Islam, which really means it's submission to God. So zakat means almsgiving, and Islam means submission to God. So when I am giving over, when I am being generous, when we are being philanthropic, it's rooted in the Arabic term, which means purity and purification. It also means growth and increase, right? So as we're giving zakat, we're growing and we're increasing our wealth and our iman, which means our connection to God, but we're also cleansing our wealth as well. So in the sense of almsgiving, I think about like how it's purifying, but it's also making me realize everything comes from God and everything goes back to God. So all the wealth, all the generosity, all the smiles, all the wonderfulness we have really come from God, but they also go back to God. For the human, it's really this very minimal part of like this material wealth that we've accumulated. And how do we use that wealth for our basic needs? But then when we have an abundance, we share it with others. So as a Muslim, as 2.5% of my monetary giving is given back to the Muslim community and the larger community, it's also making sure that I am being solemn to God's word and I'm giving back what is God's due. So God's given me something, so I'm returning it back. So every time I do something, I'm always cognizant of like, Where is my relationship with God? How am I warding off sins or miserliness as I'm doing this work? So it's a lot about me being grounded with God and doing this work, but also making sure I'm increasing my connection to the human community around me. So philanthropy really does come from the word of humankind, right? For the love of humankind. So how am I also growing that as well as I'm doing this work?
Beautiful reflections. Thank you for deepening the conversation. Zoya, what stories and images might you tell that have informed your thinking about philanthropy and faith?
So for me, it's just a function of the philanthropy that has brought all of us to this beautiful country, whether it's first gen, second gen, kind of this mosaic that we all come together as, and I'm beyond grateful to be part of this. And so I really want to pause first and thank Dilnaz and you, Dr. Braxton, Kim, CTS, for putting together this very meaningful conversation and for all of the work that you do, which is so vital, especially now. So I'm just grateful for this opportunity. So I do want to thank you for that. And then as Dilnaz did mention, I too am an immigrant and I'm just a direct beneficiary of the philanthropy coming together and helping families and those in need bring about much needed change globally. I was born in Kiev and I immigrated to this country in 1979 because of the direct persecution of my family and all the Jewish people in the Soviet Union. On the outside of my passport, it said Soviet Union, but on the inside, under nationality, it said Jewish. We were not even considered part of the people or the nation. We were Jewish and not one of them. And we were explicitly persecuted, and there was this significant discrimination. That said, thankfully, we had the opportunity as a direct result of philanthropy and political support, both from the global Jewish community and our allies, that allowed us to immigrate to this amazing country that we're all now in. My parents, though, growing up, they were not even allowed to go to synagogue or practice their religion in any way in Russia. Fortunately, when we were brought to the U.S., the community helped us reconnect, allowed us that opportunity, didn't force it on us, allowed us that opportunity to connect our heritage in a way that would definitely not have been possible in the Ukraine. And what is the Ukraine today? But one thing I did learn, and a very important value, is about tzedakah, and the closest word, which is the closest Hebrew word to philanthropy or charity. And a mitzvah of note is one of 613 commandments that Jewish people are required to observe. And one generally refers to a mitzvah as a good deed. So the mitzvah of tzedakah or philanthropy of note is actually considered one of the most important mitzvahs that someone can do. So really my faith informs me that philanthropy is a core mission and a core driving mission, and it's a core driving mission of my philanthropy. And even going back to Ben's wonderful words at the beginning where he said we're all responsible for each other, that's the image that I have, and that's the people that bring us together, and that informs my faith.
These are such beautiful reflections as we continue to move deeper into the conversation. I would like to, as a way of taking us to the next level of this, place something in the chat. And this is something that I actually wrote a few years ago. I was invited by the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University to do some work with their Lake Institute, which does a lot of work around philanthropy and faith. And when asked to think about philanthropy, particularly from the perspective of kind of African-American religion more broadly and Black Christianity more specifically, this is what I wrote. At its best, philanthropy is a process of investing in imaginative people who have audacious ideas and a relentless capacity to tangibilitate those ideas for the betterment of the world. One of the reasons that I wrote this is, and I know this was part of our pre-conversation, was a way of situating philanthropy in the everyday. It is not just the foundation that has $5 billion under assets, although it's no harm being in relationship with those kinds of foundations. But it is a realization that each of us has the opportunity to tap into this by virtue of using our imagination. And when people ask me what I do for a living, particularly as a biblical scholar of Christian scripture and as a person who teaches preaching, I say all the time, I teach imagination for a living. And for me, imagination is paying attention to what is for the sake of what may be. So it's looking at the indicative, the isness of the situation, and saying beyond this isness, there is something greater that may be if we simply invest in it. And the reason that I wanted to raise imagination is that I come from a tradition where some of the most courageous fundraisers are those church mothers across the centuries. I'm thinking about those Black church matriarchs, and the image I have for them is, because I've seen them do this, those Black religious women who would tie up coins and small dollar bills and handkerchiefs in knots so tight that only they could unloose them. And they would sometimes, way back in the day, stick them under mattresses until they heard that there was a young person who needed some tuition to make it into school. And those church women would untie those knots in those handkerchiefs and invest that change in that young person, because they believed that change in the young person would make a change in the world. So I am curious, Dilnaz and Zoya, for you to talk about how imagination plays a role, if at all, in your thinking about philanthropy.
So I'm going to take a page from what Bayan and CTS did. I think when Chicago Theological Seminary and Bayan and Islamic graduate program collaborated and are in the same building, really driving this conversation about faith and higher education, that was really dreaming boldly. That was really like taking a pause and saying, here is a UCC institution, here's a Sunni, institution driving to make sure that we are creating better scholars in this work. That is philanthropy. That is, that is the height of faiths working together, saying you should do you, but let us be us, and let us at the end of the day respect each other, but not change each other. So I really look at what Bayan and CTS did and say, yep, that's the way the world should be moving forward. I also think about, you talked about, the Black sisters who collected and gave small amounts, but there's so much research being done in also understanding how enslaved individuals, Muslim enslaved individuals, came to the lands in America and 400 years ago, right? So there were Black Muslims that came to the US 400 years ago, and majority of them were forced to change their faith because they had to be whatever the slave owner was, but a few of them held on to their faith. And we have stories from Dr. Sharik Siddiqui, who has done research and said those few men and women that held on to their faith during the month of Ramadan, there was a certain time where they collected certain amounts of food, and that food was called saraka. And those pieces of food were distributed to others. So even though they were enslaved individuals, even though they were forced to change their faith, they didn't. They did all this in secrecy, and they still continue talking about almsgiving and being charitable and doing this work. So it's really being resilient and standing up to resistance, right? So there are so many enslaved individuals that were able to do this, and we're continuing to do it. Even the three of us being in this conversation, it's standing up to resistance. It's saying we're not going to live to that narrative that, the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish brother and sister can't have a conversation. We can do this. How do we stand up to resistance and continue being philanthropic in the way that best suits our, country moving forward?
The timeliness of this conversation could not be better. Indeed. Zoya, what are your thoughts around imagination, and where else might you take the conversation?
So for me, imagination definitely is required of all of us, those as humans living in through society. And it's what's needed for us to dream, to drive the change that we really see in the world and what we need to see in the world, beyond these limitations that society and religion and all these other factors put on us. I think it's a way to work all of it together within that framework that we each have. But again, it's to allow us to truly partner with each other, in addition to kind of within our own community, we need that beyond that, because sometimes, unfortunately, especially in the state of the world today, people can't see beyond that. And to me, most of the philanthropic work that I've done is fundamentally about partnerships, and it's partnerships across the Jewish world. And we have many denominations within the Jewish community that have a lot of work to do together, and also partnering with people outside of the Jewish world. And I'd really like to share 3 core organizations that I have the honor of being a trustee on, that kind of talk through this partnership, because that's really why I've chosen to dedicate my time and philanthropy. But really, you know, what we're really limited on these days is time. So to me, I'm an honor to serve as a trustee and to bring about this change. And one of the organizations is the UJ Federation of New York, which is the broad New York Jewish Community Federation system. And one of the key tenets that we believe in is that we give not because you are Jewish, but because we are Jewish. We don't give just to Jewish causes. This is not about just to Jewish people, because a lot of UJ giving also goes to people outside the community too, but we give because we are Jewish. And it's a core tenet of who we are and the world where we have the privilege to be in. Just like in synagogue, there is a faith there is a prayer for the United States of America in American synagogues. There's a prayer we say for the strength of our country, because we understand how we are honored again to be here. And this is a core part of the synagogue prayer that Jews say. And it's just a very important part to understand. The second organization I just want to briefly touch on is the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. And we do all the intergroup, again, all the denominations within the Jewish community, and the intragroup between the Jewish community and the Muslim community, and the Jewish community and the Indian community and the Chinese community, and really this entire mosaic that specifically New York represents. And we have all these direct relationships and so support for each other during all of our times of needs, and celebrate our holidays together. And those are really the basis, and we help other communities get organized. And again, this is the basis of who we are as a people. And it's so core for us to strengthen our brothers and sisters. And I mean, and I assume, Dr. Braxton, you obviously know the history between the Jewish community and African-American community, and how the Jewish community also helped create the NAACP and really marched with Dr. King. And I work with a gentleman actually very closely called Darius Jones, and it's a National Black Empowerment Council. He is such a leader he's based in Atlanta, but it's national. He is a true leader within the African-American community, and he's a real partner. And he's really has the vision and the clarity, and he has the history of both the Jewish community and the African community and everyone else's African-American community and everyone else. It's the clarity and understanding the depth of knowledge, not just the headlines. And last, but definitely not least, I'm a trustee and incoming board chair of the Jewish Funders Network, which is an international community of philanthropists and foundations with over 3,000 members across 14 countries. And really to promote the meaningful giving and active philanthropy and best practices for the Jewish world and beyond. And you know, many of our members, we just hosted a webinar just last week for our members in terms of how our members can and continue to support what's going on, for example, with some of the Palestinian people on the grounds in Gaza. So we continue to support all the communities, and it's a core part. And actually, one last thing I do want to point out is, for example, we have something called within Jewish Funders Network, we have the Social Venture Fund that we specifically set up to support the Israeli Arabs. We initially had a fundraising goal of $250,000, and I'm very proud to say that we're now at $1.4 million, and it's really having an amazing and meaningful impact for Israeli Arab community, helping them build businesses and helping them bring up their families and really partner with us. So again, to me, philanthropy is about imagination, so not being blocked by all the limitations society gives to us in all different times of our complicated world, but it gives me the vision to move forward and do the good that needs to be done in this world.
And anyone listening to the two of you all will obviously have their imagination sparked. This is a rich dialogue. There's at least one other question that I want to pose in this section, and we'll see where that takes us, and then open up to the broader family for further dialogue. In the spirit of, as the folks often say out in the street, keeping this completely 100 and all the way real, let's talk about some of the obstacles that we have faced and are facing in philanthropy, however we might define it. And I will just kick us off by saying that it was really one of the highlights of my journey and career and ministry to serve as the program officer in religion at the Ford Foundation. And I learned a considerable amount at the time when I was at Ford. I think Ford had under management probably about $12 billion. So it is one of the world's largest foundations, and learned a great deal. And what was so powerful was I came to Ford just as Darren Walker was becoming the president. And he still is, of course, a president and a global leader in philanthropy. And the precious conversation that I had as I began with Darren, that Darren's ascendancy to the presidency of the Ford Foundation is deeply rooted in Black church communities and all that he learned as he was at the Abyssinian Baptist Church and working with leaders in Harlem. So that was a remarkable experience, and yet that also showed me one of the obstacles that I did want to name, and I'm happy for you all to muse on it, and we can talk further about it as you raise your obstacles. One of the obstacles, particularly in more traditional philanthropy, if you'll allow me to say it that way, is that in a well-meaning way, not at all questioning its motive, often traditional philanthropy compels creative individuals and organizations to unnecessarily chase after program dollars, when what is actually needed because of historic built-in inequities are capacity resources that help to prop up great organizations. So as a program officer, I was often struggling with the fact that a great program does not necessarily mean a great institutional organization. But I do believe that if we're able to prop up resilient, and powerful, and imaginative organizations and institutes and communities of necessity, they will spin out world-changing, life-changing programs. So I do think sometimes the ways in which we just force this programmatic focus, where what we really need are to make stands. So, and I'm thinking specifically about theological education. One of the great obstacles we have now is we need big traditional philanthropy to understand that pursuing training in religious studies right through in here needs to be a philanthropic endeavor, because you're not inherently going to come out and make large and command large salaries like colleagues in other disciplines. So what would it be if we didn't have to churn out a program and a program and a program, but we could prop up healthy institutions that have the kinds of endowments that scholars in other disciplines have, and we could relax, not in the sense of resting on our laurels, but not be in this state of constant crisis, and then do really transformative work. So I wish we could have more capacity building and less chasing after programmatic funds, if I could be really honest. That was one of the things that I wrestled with as a program officer in a large foundation. Zoya, let me kick it to you now and ask, what are you thinking about as you wrestle with obstacles? What are some of the challenges you see?
I mean, as we know in philanthropy, there's always obstacles and challenges, and starting from some of the business models too. And I actually do want to touch on Darren Walker, actually, because I just had him, I co-chaired JFN's conference this past March, where we had over 700 people, and he was one of our keynotes. And I think of him as a massive leader, and really and I always knew he was a leader. And this doesn't have to do with Ford Foundation's AUM, but just his vision, his imagination, and his philosophy, and which really, really came out during COVID, where most other endowments foundations turned inward. They're like, kids aren't coming to school, donations aren't going to come in. Let me just hold on to this money as much as I can. And he's like, you know what? Now's the time. Don't limit yourself at 5%. We're going to go above. We're going to put in more. The community needs us. I am being the first to step up and take a real leadership role, where he gave out more. Everyone else was saying, like, maybe I give out less. Let me do and that's when the community really had need. And when the community had need, he stepped up, and that caused so many other people behind him, but he was that leader. So I've always had massive amounts of respect for him. And he literally, in my eyes, saved thousands of nonprofits, because if he didn't start that, no one else would have come behind him. And then unfortunately, in their time of need, it wasn't going to happen. So, I mean, what he's done in his vision, that's what we need. And I hear what you're saying, especially in terms of we need to move from the capacity resources not just being programmatic and kind of like probably like version of a whack-a-mole, right? Where you're here. Like, no, I'm looking longer term, and we need to train people short term, medium term, and longer term, and have that pipeline. But to me, kind of taking a step back, it's really about the education of philanthropists. It's up to us to tell that story like you were dynamically doing, Dr. Braxton, and really give them the more of the trajectory of where are you looking to go, why this needs to be a multi-year grant, why is this more of a relationship, it's not a one-off financial transaction. And that's where, you know, there needs to be that understanding of that. And part of that trajectory, the way I see it, is how I actually think in our world today, how we talk about philanthropy needs to change. I live in New York City with our two sons, and you know, no one seems to have a problem asking me how much my apartment was, or how much is this, and how much is that. Like, nobody has any problems talking about money in almost every area of the world today, except philanthropy. People don't talk about how much do they give, and or as a percentage or something, right? I know people who graduate college, they give $100 to the United Way campaign. You check with them 10 years later, and again, you don't know how many other family members they need to support, what other student loans they have, health issues, whatever it is. You check them back, they're at $150. We talk about, I happen to work on Wall Street, and on Wall Street, there are some competitive people that work on Wall Street, and on Wall Street, it's a focus of moving from an analyst to associate to VP to director to an MD. It's constantly getting to that next level. And people are always talking about your career trajectory. No one talks about philanthropic trajectories. No one's saying, you know, if you gave this, you should be giving more, consider giving more this year, whether it's a percent, and as Dilnaz thoughtfully explains, and whether it's as a percent, right? And whether it's pre-tax, post-tax, whatever it is, you always need to be reaching, because the needs in the community are so great that you need to understand better how to contribute to that. And once you get into that cycle, you understand not just the value proposition, but how much it gives back to you. I mean, this is one of the most things I'm most grateful for to be in this world, is the philanthropy I'm allowed to contribute to. I have the honor to. But again, you need to lean into it for you to really do it versus being just a transaction, right? Especially now, it's not even a check, it's like a credit card, right? It just put it on some website for a bike-a-thon, but that's not it. But I think it's on all of us as philanthropists and people like yourself, Dr. Braxton, to have that conversation, because people also don't know, right? So you know, in your community, when you go to a wedding, what's an appropriate number, right? You know, if it's just you, if it's you and your wife, or you and your partner, you know what that number is. But most people don't know what that number is. Like, sometimes they'll get a box that you check. Is it 50? It's 100, 150. In the Jewish community, it's $36, $180, whatever it is, right? But people don't have a frame of reference. We, as philanthropists and just donors, right? We need to talk to our peers. We need to talk to our donors, push each other and encourage each other, right? And have these conversations with just on a friendly basis. Take that edge, as Dilnaz also talks about, of being a philanthropist. It's just being a member of our society, but it's on us to educate, to guide people. Because just like I wouldn't know if I was going to Germany, how much is a wedding? How much am I supposed to give to gift in Germany? People from the outside the philanthropic world, they don't know what's an appropriate number. They don't have that guidance, and they don't know what a reach number is from what am I giving this year, and what am I going to give in 3 years and 5 years. So it's on us, and as a responsibility, to teach people, to give them that story, to help them with that imagination and vision, like a Darren Walker did for his peers. And it's on us. I have the conversation so many times with people and talking them through it, because there should be no shame on this either. It doesn't have to be about numbers. It's about the growth trajectory. So that's one of my missions. So thank you for that.
So I do see Dean Vogt on here. So Zoya, I think you may have talked yourself along with Dilnaz, and maybe I can guest lecture into a course on the philanthropic trajectory. You know, Dean Vogt, we'll talk offline. You know, maybe something's brewing here. Dilnaz, your reflections on that, and then we'll open up to the broader family for conversation.
Yeah, I think the word that really resonates with me as we start this conversation is a power dynamic, and the power dynamic there is between the grantor and the grantee, the funder and the fundee, all of that, right? But I'm also so thankful that in the last 3 years we really have an awakening, a reawakening of like how philanthropy should be done and how it should be done well. And of course, going back to like what Ford Foundation and has been doing, and a lot of other leaders been doing as well, in making sure that they are seeing who's at the table, but more importantly, who's not at the table. So a lot of my experiences, a lot of my lived experiences are not who you usually see at the philanthropic table. When you go to philanthropic convenings and you have conversations about where funds should go, it really isn't people that have had my lived experience or that look like me, that sound like me. So how do we diversify that? How do we make sure the philanthropic table looks like America, and we make sure that people that have those lived experiences are in the decision making? So as you know, as Dr. Braxton, you had mentioned earlier, nonprofits are really struggling, right? They're struggling with a lack of time, a lack of money, a lack of innovation. They can't take risks, but places like corporate places and Wall Street, they can take risks, and we're like, oh, awesome, nice job, good work. But the moment a nonprofit takes a risk, it's like, whoa, it's not your money. How are you allowed to do this? But I love how you're also telling us, teaching us, Zoya, like it's important to teach this, right? Sometimes it doesn't come organically. It's not like a kitchen table conversation where it just comes organically, but what does it mean to have, a college higher ed courses and seminary courses and religious institution courses teaching us how to be philanthropic advocates to do this work and making sure that we're not doing it in our silos, but we're collaborating with other institutions. And we're also sharing how difficult it is, right? So a lot of times over here, you have nonprofits talking about barriers and hardships. And over here, you have philanthropists talking about barriers and hardships, but we're not talking with each other. How do we talk to each other and make sure that we hear each other's stories? So how do we make sure that we're also in space where we're also trying to make this landscape different? But I honestly believe in the last few years, things are changing and the landscape is changing. And it's people like the three of us and everyone on this call that are going to be making those changes. But not seeing who's at the table, but really whose voices are missing at the table, to me is very important.
What wonderful reflections the two of you all have offered. And I'm very delighted to open up now to the family to further engage this, and I'll try to monitor the chat. Kim, will you also please help me to monitor if there are things in the chat? Please respond with your questions and other prompts for the dialogue.
And folks are also welcome to unmute themselves as well. And
I don't have a question and more so a comment. So great conversation. I jumped in a little bit later, but I can definitely relate overseeing a Latino serving nonprofit. And I think thinking more about how do we increase, right, in terms of the representation, in terms of giving. So I can totally relate to that. It's something that's at the forefront more than ever as we're looking to increasingly diversify funding, not only for our nonprofit, but just ensuring that we're helping to build more of that understanding. And the other comment that was made that I can relate to, growing up being the daughter of immigrants, and it's a new culture. It's something that's new to us, and you don't talk about money, right? So it's new to the culture, and so there's a lot of things that popped up in my mind as I was listening that I can agree with. So I just want to thank you for the conversation.
Patricia, one other thing, I was just thinking about being community-led, right? So how important it is for us to be in those spaces and make sure that we're just there, we're listening to what the community wants, not what like maybe the funder wants, not how to drive what the funder's objectives are, but really what the community's objectives are. So I appreciate that comment.
I believe Reverend Dr. Arlene Naring has a question, and there is a comment in the chat.
Yeah, thank you for calling on me. I apologize for the formality of my title on the Zoom. I pop back and forth between so many different things. Just a word about my context. I am DMin and homiletics graduate of of CTS class of '95. And I have not been a participant in any like webinar thing, sad to say, because we've been so drowning in COVID out here. I'm on the left coast in Castro Valley, Hayward, California, Alameda County, California. And I signed up for the webinar today solely because it was interfaith. I mean, we all have to raise money. We need to raise money for our ministries and so forth. But I signed up for it because one of the very best things about coming to California and the Bay Area, one of the greatest blessings has been to be able to make more friends within the interfaith communities. And I grew up on a farm in Iowa. The chances for that were really small. And one of the things I'm really, proud about is my congregation's role in helping to found the Eden Area Interfaith Council. And even more than that, I'm so proud of the fact that it has more Muslim groups than Christian. Because my prior experience of interfaith work is a bunch of Protestants, one Catholic priest, one Jewish rabbi, and no Muslims. And I'm not proud of that. Not proud. And so I just wanted to, I guess my point is, I just celebrate the very fact that we're having this conversation. And, the children of Abraham, if we can't get this going, among faith leaders, how's it going to get any better, in our neighborhoods, right? Or the Middle East or whatever. So I just thank you all for being here. And we couldn't run our food pantry in the poorest zip code in Alameda County, California. That's where the city of Oakland is. We're across the bay from a smaller city that people know better called San Francisco. We could not have run our food pantry without our Jewish neighbors being a part of a grassroots, bottom-up series of conversations about how to reduce violence in our community. Because we're not rich. Most of our neighbors are first-generation monolingual Spanish speakers from Mexico and now increasingly Central America. And when I get called on, as I often do, from the principals at our local schools, our district is a Title I school. We have 23,000 students in our school district, and we qualify as Title I. And they beg me for help to how to help the poorest, most desperate children in our district. They're like, can your church help? Can you take this? Can you adopt us too? We know you've adopted Cherryland School. Can you adopt us too? I mean, I just like, we want to, but we're not rich, but we have friends. and the Sikh temple in town, was the first to step up. And they, the ask was, could you buy backpacks for the poorest kids? And they said, sure. But then in the end, they ended up bringing backpacks full of school supplies for every child in the elementary school, that elementary school. And let me tell you, talk is talk. And then there's walk. And even better,
Absolutely.
Integration. So I'll stop there. But thanks for listening.
You are. It's so wonderful to hear that reflection, and particularly around the interfaith aspect. One of the things that I hope in our best moments today that we're modeling is the importance of humility and curiosity and an openness to learning with and from one another, that there's real strength in that. There is a question in the chat. Are any gifts too small? Many people think their gifts won't make a difference. I'll pose that to these two world-class philanthropists, even though I know we're problematizing the term. Are any gifts too small?
I think that's where the trajectory starts. Like, we have to encourage it. I think, you know, we have to actually put the same thing as we have to help people along the trajectory. We have to kind of take away the optics that $36, $25 isn't, because that's where it starts, right? And just like we see kind of all these grassroots campaigns, like that's first we should start younger and smaller. To me, I think that's like the perfect start of a trajectory. It's not kind of where you are on the ladder, it's how many rungs you climb. So for me, I think that every gift is the right gift. It just has to be the right gift for that person, and then they just need to grow. And sometimes we all also philanthropically in our lives have ups and downs, right? So it's not always going to be straight up, but as long as it's core and it's focused, then it should be welcome.
I also think about like how important your time is, right? So even if it's a small gift, and for you it might seem like a small gift, but for that organization, it's also you spending your time and making sure that your time is invested into that organization. And sometimes it starts with a small gift and then getting to know the organization and be like, oh, you know what? I have an aunt, I have a sister, I've got a friend that can give as well. And collective giving is such an important aspect of how we're moving together and understanding this so much better about, like, you know, this ecosystem of philanthropy. So making sure you go ahead and give that small gift, but then you also tell the story of the organization, right? So you might give a small gift, but let's tell the story of the organization you're giving to and get other people involved in that organization. And then let's just continue volunteering, because when you think about the philanthropy, how it collects data, it's unfortunately very money driven. How much money are certain people giving to organizations? We need to change that shift, right? We need to start thinking about how much time are people giving to the organization? What type of stories are we telling about the organization? So there's so much to just giving a small gift. So there's other stories that you could tell about that small organization and the gift that you're giving.
Absolutely marvelous. And the joint is jumping now in the chat. I just want to read this affirmation, and then I see the projector party there in the building has a question. So in the chat from Catherine, this is encouraging. It's difficult to share our journeys, to encourage giving. Many see conversations with other organizations. It often feels risky that we won't get our share of the funds gathered or credit for the work. We need to grow past this. A hearty amen to that. Thank you for that affirmation. The projector party, what's going on in the party there?
Hi, everyone. This is Haley Hudler. I am a CTS alum, CTS staff member, and current fundraiser. I did have a question about, oftentimes I'm in just spaces where fundraisers are collaborating and sharing ideas of how we're going about trying to receive funds from philanthropists and whatnot. And I think there's this struggle of speaking openly about our faith and how that is for different individual donors or maybe larger organizations. There's this hesitancy of talking about how our faith motivates us to give. And even there's maybe a grant making where foundations are saying, oh, we don't give to religious orgs. And there's this like limitation of like who different organizations not allowed to give to quote unquote religious organizations. So my question is, how can we use religion in conversation to actually open that up to have that be an inspiration to have people donate more from a faith-based stance? Thank you.
I can go briefly. So I too have had that in terms of some people have stated or unstated limitations of kind of donating to anything with a religious connotation. If it's stated and it's explicit, then you can have the conversation with the leadership and talk through it. But there's very few that it's where it's explicit. It's just kind of a broader policy. But what I've actually found success for is kind of like the underlying. So for example, at UJA, I know the pastor was just talking about the food pantries. So we have two food pantries that we built, one in Brooklyn and one in Queens, and where it's actually a more electronic food pantry now, where people can order like specific versus here's your bag, you and every family is just this generic family, with actually kind of a digital food pantry where people could actually choose based on their lactose intolerance or whatever it is their needs are as a family and allergies, right? They specifically choose their food, and then we also have on-site job and also health resources. But the point is, so it goes under the umbrella of UJA, so a Jewish organization, but this is a community effort for those in the community that are, so we've been able to secure donations kind of because of what it is. So you go back to telling the story and how, and sometimes, by the way, you just go back to like, well, who else is serving this if it's not coming from a religious community? Again, as the pastor said, so by default, it has to be, sometimes in these cases, it's the religious communities that are stepping up. So, if there's no alternative, you're saying because you're not supporting a religious organization, then you're not going to support this. That doesn't make sense. So let me show you for what it is and stop kind of judging me for this title that you're seeing on my email address.
Yeah, I totally agree with Zoya. It's also being innovative, right? So when you write that grant, when you write that proposal, be innovative and talk about your 501c3 and how you're really supporting all the communities in the neighborhood and making sure that we also continue pushing back. So when you look at the USA Giving Report for 2022, and this is true for the last 50 years, faith giving and faith institutions get probably number 1 or number 2 in the last 50 years allocations from philanthropy, right? So individuals from the US are giving to faith institutions. No matter how much we say our faith is declining, less people are saying they're nuns, we're still giving to our faith institutions. And if we're still giving to our faith institutions, how do we make sure we are telling those stories of how important it is to have a food pantry run by a mosque or a synagogue or a church? And if you think about the individual, like recently Maeve just came from Afghanistan and she has domestic violence issues. She's not going to go to a synagogue. She's not going to go to church. She may go to a mosque, right? So telling that story in your proposal of why it's so important to still fund institutions that have a 501c3 that might be leaning next to a faith institution is important. So storytelling is a very important aspect of where funds are allocated and where funds aren't allocated.
I think if we're listening with our third ear, we can hear out of the generative nature what's going on in the chat and the brilliance of these questions and responses, that this has been a rich moment for our community. And the pun is fully intended there. I want to always stay on the right side of Kim Schultz as my friend. And so we want to respect that the hour has come. But I do encourage you, even as we're closing, to scan the chat. And is it a correct assumption, Kim? Is the chat saved? Because there's a wonderful question from Professor Mikva, picking up on this notion of chasing after program dollars, and there are other wonderful affirmations. Do we save these chats just so we can archive some of these thoughts going forward? Because my sense is there's got to be a round 2 of this.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this chat. So thank you for all of these comments. Yes, and we'll work to make sure that we get that chat saved and we can maybe share it and continue this conversation. I didn't mean to cut you off, President Braxton. Did you? Okay.
I'm going to turn it back over to you, and I will just say this. This whole conversation has been rooted in a spirit of generosity and gratitude. And I just want to say, on behalf of the CTS family, to Zoya and Dilnaz, how grateful we are to you for being a part of our community, for joining our family, and for depositing in us in the rich ways you have done with your wisdom and your expertise. Thank you for bringing so much to us today. What a marvelous
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Dilnaz,
for the opportunity.
Again, being a partner, and thank you, CTS and Dr. Braxton and Kim and everything you guys do. I mean, as we all know, our world greatly needs the work that you're doing. So I'm just grateful to you that you're doing this for all of us.
Thank you all for joining us. Just a real quick plug. If you don't know, our podcast is in its 5th episode, our 3rd season, our7neighbors.com. So please listen if you haven't. 2 more episodes to go. 1 more episode after this week, I should say, with Reverend Jesse Jackson. So we look forward, and also Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes, the new president of Rainbow Push. So that should be a great final episode. And unless there's anything else, we are 1 minute after. And I just want to say a final thank you for everybody for your time and for joining this very excellent conversation. Have a great day, everybody.